7 is going to be focused on several different things, but the first assignment is essentially an art history report. In the module book, if you're looking at module number 7, you'll see starting on page 128 or the first page of module 7 that we have a timeline of art history. The first thing that you may notice is that there is a 1,000-year jump, essentially, in a way, because we have everything before 500 AD, and that's now referred to as CE or Common Era, by the way. We have ancient art. There is one picture representing many, many thousands of years of art. So, the Roman sculpture that's based off of a Greek sculpture of the discus thrower that's shown here is really only a representative image that's just saying before 500 CE, we're looking at ancient art. So anything that falls into that category is fair game under that heading. Egyptian, Greek, petroglyphs, geoglyphs, all that kind of stuff is in this general group and can be really interesting. So if it's something that you're considering, you might think about that. I'm going to quickly pull up a browser window and type in, as an example, Egyptian art. And I'm going to get a variety of different things that are showing up here, and it's looking a little crazy based on where I have it. Sorry, I'm not grabbing the right spot. All right, so a lot of different stuff came up under Egyptian art. If the ancient art area was one that you found interesting, you didn't like the discus thrower, but you like Egyptian stuff, then you can talk about or write about a particular piece of artwork or a particular style that was common in ancient Egypt. Maybe you like stone carving, or maybe you like the really opulent gold artwork with the different stone inlay. You could talk about that. If you were more interested in petroglyphs, and a petroglyph is carved into stone. That's what the petro part of the word means. You could talk about something like the petroglyph that's currently on the screen. There were a lot of reasons that these were done. There's a lot of theories on them. But at its heart, it's a communication method, but it's also an artistic celebration. So petroglyphs will be good too. The idea, regardless of the particular time period that you choose, is that you're going to focus on a particular piece of art or style, a particular artist, or a particular time period. And having picked either your artwork, your artist, or your time period, you're going to write about that for about 1.5 pages to 2 pages. The page length that's mentioned does not include pictures, but you do also need to include a picture or two in your paper. And you're trying to provide grammatically correct information about whatever your particular subject is. If you're talking about a particular time period, obviously there's less detail there and it's broader than if you're focused for the whole paper on one particular piece of artwork. But anyway, so the first one is ancient art. The second grouping, again, a big time jump, is going to be medieval art. And this is, in general, religious, because that's the primary group that was paying for the artwork during this interval. So you have a lot of things that are more traditionally seen in a church, or that certainly have religious themes. And it includes all of the items that show up in this list. And it leads you into, and there's a little bit of overlap, if you'll notice, between medieval art and Renaissance art, into the Renaissance. So 15th through 17th centuries, which is 1400 through 1600-ish, CE is the Renaissance. It's happening throughout Europe. Obviously heavy focus in Italy, but it extends all around Europe into the Netherlands, which obviously gets us into Rembrandt and so forth. But it's a lot of artists that are doing at least some religious artwork. The Sistine Chapel ceiling is what we're seeing in this particular image, and this is obviously Michelangelo. but there's a lot of other things that fit into the group. So if you like Da Vinci, then you could absolutely do your write-up on Leonardo da Vinci, or you could focus on a particular piece by Da Vinci, or you could look more particularly at, for example, how perspective is used heavily for really the first time in artwork during the Renaissance period, and why some of that might be. So you can choose your focus a bit. As you keep going down the list, we have Baroque art, we have Rococo art, which is, Baroque is more flowery, more detailed, and more opulent than most of your Renaissance art. Rococo art is even more than that. It's overly embellished, it's super floral. If there's a frame on it, it is detailed within an inch of its life. And as a reaction to that, we have some of the neoclassical art that's coming up. You see classical Greek and Roman architecture. You see classical Greek and Roman style clothing in a lot of the paintings. It's a lot more spare than the Rococo work was. And in many cases, it's referring to classical, meaning Greek and Roman, stories and motifs. We have the Romanticists. You can sort of picture, if you think about the writers of this time period, Wuthering Heights, you can almost picture this as being Heathcliff looking out over the moor for any of the English literature people in the group. We have the academic artist, and there was a very much an art school and a very, quote, correct way of painting, and if you were doing it correctly, you were painting in the academic style, and that's throughout the 19th century, which is the 1800s. Starting in the mid 1800s, mid 19th century, we have realism happening. And the reason this particular painting is interesting and a good representative image of that style is that it showed ordinary people in ordinary clothes doing ordinary jobs. They're not posing, they're not looking dramatic, they're certainly not dressed in their best clothes. They're doing everyday jobs, and that is actually fairly unusual, and it was considered fairly revolutionary for artwork. Because again, keep in mind, most of the people who owned these artwork were wealthy, and all of a sudden they're interested in having representations of, quote, real life. And so that makes realism interesting, maybe, if that's something you like. We have the Pre-Raphaelites, which is, there's a lot of literary references, a little bit, it's not Rococo because it's not as overly embellished as that, but there is certainly some drama and some symbolism to those. And then starting at around 1870 through the turn of the 20th century, we have the Impressionists. Cézanne is kind of post-impressionist, but we have Monet, we have Renoir, and a lot of the other impressionists who are doing something really revolutionary at the time. They are trying to take painting from these flat, perfect things where you typically didn't see the brushstrokes into these quicker impressionist images. And what impressionist means in that context is they were trying to capture a moment. Keep in mind that photography is new during this time period. So to capture a moment by a painter was not an absurd concept. Instead of taking months to do a painting, they might do one in a day or a couple of days or a week. That's fast for painting, and that's what the Impressionists were doing. The Impressionists, by the way, are considered to be the last non-modern art grouping that we're going to look at. Some people argue that modern art starts with Impressionism, but many people say modern art starts with the 20th century. So that's kind of where we're drawing our line. We have the Post-Impressionists, who include Georges Seurat, and this is a pointillist painting. You can't really tell, certainly in this tiny example, but Seurat was painting with tiny daubs of paint. And if you want to compare that to any of our contemporary culture, what that means, and many people have drawn comparisons to, is the pixel. So if you look at a close-up image of a pointillist painting, and we're not going to be able to do that very well here in the browser that I've got going on, but you might get a little bit of a hint of it with this pointillist inspired image, is that it's a series of daubs of paint that are layered in a specific way so that they interact with each other and form a complete image in exactly the same way that pixels build up on the screen. So a lot of people find that tie in interesting, and maybe that's something that you want to explore. But anyway, so that's the post-impressionists. They include a lot of other artists and a lot of other styles beyond pointillism. We have impressionism, which includes Vincent van Gogh, and expressionism, and lots of other ones that are in there. We have the symbolist paintings, who were painting simultaneously with the impressionists. They tended to use a slightly more realistic style, but their images were heavily, heavily symbolic. And I've actually forgotten the band that used this particular image as inspiration, but this is considered to be one of the real classic symbolic images. We have the Fauvists, and this is a Cézanne image. The Fauvists they're more modern looking than some of the other ones, certainly. Bold colors, somewhat flat compositions, skewed proportions. They're not for everybody. I happen to think they're beautiful, but again, we have Matisse, we have Cézanne that are painting in a somewhat Fauvist style. We have Van Gogh, who is our expressionist. The Starry Night is the most famous of his paintings, but he had a lot of others. And then we get into the Cubists, and this is a Picasso example. We have the Futurists, who have aspects of the Cubists. And then we have into the abstract art. So the idea is that you pick one of these topics and try to do the 2-page paper on it. The paper, I wish the phone were not calling.
No one is available to take your phone call right now. Please leave your name, number, and time that you called, and we'll call you back.
If I could turn it off, I would. But anyway, so sorry. You're going to pick a topic that you find interesting. You are going to do the 2-page paper. You're going to provide the image, and then separately you're going to build a very brief slideshow in Google Slides. The slideshow needs to consist of at least 5 slides, as if you were going to do a presentation on this. And they can be largely picture-oriented. But they need to include at least a few words, and it doesn't have to be more than 5. In all probability, we're not going to be doing these as presentations because of the current limitations, but prepare the slideshow as if you are. And what you're turning in for assignment number 49 is the 1.5 to 2-page paper plus image and the slideshow. The paper, again, can be in Word, Google Docs, and the slideshow can be in Slides or PowerPoint, and you can zip them, or you can together, or you can zip them separately, and you'll upload them to Blackboard. And if I could get it to stop, I would.